Good morning. We have today Simon Wardley, one of our Agile 20 Reflect patrons, and actually the final of our patrons to be interviewed as part of the festival. So Simon, it's absolutely wonderful to be speaking with you today. For those of you,
absolute delight to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
not a problem. So for those of you that are listening that aren't familiar with Simon's work, Simon, would you mind giving us just a little bit of an intro about yourself and what you are about?
Oh gosh. My background, I've built and run companies before. I got involved in extreme programming back in, about 1999. Company went all agile. 2002, 2001, something like that. Agile Manifesto had come out. Discovered it didn't work everywhere. By about 2004, couldn't understand quite why. Eventually got into something called mapping the context. I started using this in 2005. Done so for 16 years odd now. It turns out that mapping is actually useful for many different areas, and other people seem to find it useful as well. So I'm probably I'm sort of known for stuff in the open source world, stuff in the enterprise 2.0 world, stuff in the agile world, stuff in the sort of mapping world, different things in different areas, but probably mostly for mapping. Oh, and some stuff in cloud. But
A bit of a range then, but primarily
bit of a
mapping.
range.
Yeah, and I hosted a talk on the Agile Manifesto, and I shared about your Warldey doctrine as a bit of an alternative to the Agile Manifesto, given that there were some concerns from people about the manifesto being a bit dogmatic, or at least people applying it dogmatically. Now, so the festival intends to celebrate the past, the present, and the future of Agile, and I'd love to explore the present with you. So what are your thoughts on the notion that the Agile Manifesto isn't fit for purpose in 2021?
Well, see, I'm going to go from a slightly different view.
Okay.
It's much easier to show you on a map, but basically, if I just explain the ideas, things evolve. So you start off with the genesis, the novel, new, custom-built examples, products, and then rental, commodity, products and rental, then commodity and utility services. So things evolve. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about electricity or computing. Now, it's not only things, but practice, data, knowledge, even ethical values evolve as well. We give slightly different terms for those stages depending upon what we're talking about. So practice, we might go novel, emerging, good, and best. Now, the two are not interconnected as well. So not only do things evolve, there are relationships. So often when things evolve, you'll get a co-evolution of practice. So it's all sort of interconnected. Now, if we talk about something evolving, a thing, it has a meaning. It could be, I don't know, computing or teleportation. Start off with Genesis at some point in the future. Maybe it evolve and become eventually utility-like. Then what you've got is something like project management, another meaning. And within that, you can sometimes have multiple competencies. And those competencies are suited to a particular context. So, for example, extreme programming is very good at Genesis, creating novel and new, because deviation is normal. That's what you have. You've got to reduce the cost of change. And XP has evolved to be best practice for doing that stuff. Mm-hmm. And then something like Lean, so you're talking Scrum and MVP and all those other artifacts, has evolved to be really good in the middle. So this is like the late custom product stage, where we're all about learning and reducing waste. And then something like Six Sigma has evolved to be really good practice for the more commodity stuff. Okay. So, but the problem is we don't like that because we don't see the landscape, we don't see the context, so we can't see how to apply appropriate methods. So what we do is constantly try to create the perfect one-size-fits-all method. Mm-hmm. So Agile everywhere, Six Sigma everywhere, Lean everywhere. And then what happens, you go to a conference and somebody's going, Six Sigma works everywhere. It's great for innovation. Well, product to utility innovation, yes, but not Genesis. And they go, it's better than Agile, and here's examples of why. And then you go to an Agile conference and they say, Agile works everywhere, and it's better than Six Sigma, and here's an example of why. And the answer is, they're all right and all wrong. because each of the methods have an appropriate context. So the biggest problem I see in the last 20 years with the Agile Manifesto is we've had 20 years of consultants trying to make Agile fit everywhere. And so if we want to actually make Agile better, what we need to do is remove 20 years of consultants and go back to the original manifesto and concentrate on the context where Agile, as in extreme programming, very lightweight, which is my ideal example, the work of Kent Beck. Kent's a fantastic person. It works best. So very much when people say, what do we need in Agile 2.0 and the Agile Manifesto? I mean, we need the manifesto without the 20 years of additional consultancy, let's make it fit everywhere stuff. And we need to pare it back and go back to where we used to be.
Very interesting, and
so that's my answer.
it's a great answer. Actually, one that really resonates with me. Whenever I describe Agile to people, I'm not talking about this is a copy and paste situation. I'm not telling you to take on the latest Spotify model. I'm not telling you to emulate exactly what another company's done. What I'm saying is, here you have Agile, and underneath it you have Scrum, you have Kanban, you have all these different approaches that you can try and learn from and experiment with until you find what works for you and your situation, your culture, your people.
Well, you've also got things like Scale Agile Framework. They're there to make
Exactly.
it work everywhere. This is just like, the problem is by bolting on more and more things onto Agile, you end up trying to make the magic size one size fits all method, which doesn't work everywhere. And then what happens is they use it doesn't work, and they go, oh, we used the wrong bits. You should use those bits. And so what we've done is we've taken something which was all about people over process, designed for that world of Genesis, the novel anew, and bolted it on to now we're at the telling people, oh, well, you did it wrong. You used the wrong bit of the process. So it's now process over people. So we've completely messed it up. I'm not I understand what they're trying to do with Scale Agile Framework. I understand. But if you're asking me about Agile, I think the best example is lightweight extreme programming paired back to the principles. And if we want to go forward, I think what we have to do is remove the 20 years of people trying to make that stuff work everywhere. We need to understand its context, where it is suited, and we need to learn to accept there are other methods. And I would make distinctions between even extreme programming and Scrum. And I think when we're talking lean, we are talking more Scrum and many, many other artifacts like MVP as well. I mean, in the Genesis world, you don't have an MVP. You don't even know what you're building. So that is where but once you've got an MVP, a minimal viable product, you're in the world of, you're defining where you're going, and now you're into learning and reducing waste. And eventually, that same thing, you should be about reducing deviation, and that is the world of Six Sigma. So I think we need to start understanding context more and paring down those techniques to be really good at those contexts. Now, you mentioned doctrine. Doctrine is a list of universally useful principles. I see that as something somewhat separate. Starting with, these are universally useful principles. And they're things like, and there's a very limited number of them, things like focusing on users. It turns out it's a pretty good idea to understand who your users are before you do something. Focusing on user needs. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's Agile or Six Sigma, understanding user needs turns out to be a rather sensible thing to do. Understanding your landscape as well. So they're slightly separate, but in terms of methods, in order to go forward, I think we need to step back 20 years.
Extremely poignant, and I completely agree with you about focusing on the customer. If there was one metric I subscribe to, it's something called days since last user engagement, and that keeps the teams anchored to continuously engaging with their users, the people that are actually using the products they're creating, rather than focusing on my velocity or my lead times and things like that. Focus on how often you engage with users. All right. So
one of the whole principles of extreme programming is you should be developing it with the person there. I mean, the number of days, it shouldn't be number of days, it should be number of hours.
Ideally, yeah.
But yes.
Okay, so let's move a little bit away from the Agile Manifesto. I'd love to hear about, I guess, some of your experiences, some of the people that you look up to. So who would you say your Agile hero is?
Oh, Kent Beck.
Who inspired? Kent Beck.
There we are, easy.
Okay, and a little bit more. Why so?
Well, just from a personal point of view, I mean, extreme programming for me back in 1999 was because I very much struggling with how to. At that time, we were building a lot of stuff, which was very much in the Genesis phase, and struggling to find the right approach to tackling that problem. I found extreme programming. If I'm going to single anyone out, I found extreme programming to be a superb method, and so that would be my hero. There we are.
Nice and simplest, nice and easy answer. Okay, so I'm someone who's a huge proponent of the retrospective. It's probably my favorite ceremony. The idea of just looking back and thinking about what you could do better and improve upon, but not always asking the same questions. I always try and refresh it. So I'm not all about, what did you do last time? What are you going to do better this time? I try and do things in a bit more abstract terms. So I'm often doing themed retrospectives on movies and films. But what I would love to hear from you is about some of your learnings and that you might share with us. So if there was one learning from your whole career that you feel would help those that are new to Agile, what would it be?
And probably, the biggest learning, and I'm just going to generalize this way beyond Agile, is challenging assumptions. The single biggest learning that I've come across. And challenging assumption is not necessarily easy, particularly in a world of stories. And the reason why challenging assumption is difficult in a world of stories is because we tell everybody to be a great leader, you've got to be a great storyteller. And so then we tell people that your story didn't succeed because you sold it in the wrong way. And the problem with that is when you challenge somebody's story, you are challenging them as a person. So it becomes highly political very rapidly. One of the reasons why I like putting stories down on maps is I challenge the map, not the person. So I say the map is wrong, not the person is wrong. So you've got to have a common language, a common sort of framework. You've got to deal with the politics. But if you do that, challenging assumptions, and the best way I find for learning is to do pre-mortem, post-mortem. So before we do something, map it out, and we challenge the assumptions of the map. And then what we do is after the event, do a post-mortem. And use the same map and look at what changed, and we challenge that and what did we learn. So I like the idea of the retrospectives, but for me the heart of it, and probably the one thing that most businesses don't do very well at all, if at all, is challenge assumptions.
I love the idea of depersonalizing the situation by putting it out onto a map, and rather than challenging, as you said, the person and the ideas. So I think that's hugely powerful. It's something I think a lot of people could learn from when they move into the world of Agile. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. So it's had this huge, major impact on everyone, and we now, you were talking to me a little bit earlier about how you're having to work remotely and some of the things you're having to do to try and make that feasible from your location. What would you say is your top tip for remote working? How do you make it work for you?
Gosh. Okay, so the thing about the pandemic is and more importantly, the isolation economy, because there's the horror of the pandemic, the deaths and so forth, and then there's the isolation economy, which is forcing upon us. That acts as a forcing function for adoption of pre-existing activities, and one of them is like virtual conferences. So the first virtual conference I did was 2006, so that's 15 years ago, and we've given all these reasons why we can't do it. Social interaction, and of course we've been forced into this space, and now we're learning to adapt. And I suppose that's no different from New York City, turn of the 20th century. If you walked in New York City, mountains of horse manure because of the horses, that acted as a forcing function for the adoption of the motor car and the subsequent change of society. The economy never went back to how it was. Practices changed, and the same will happen with this pandemic, the isolation economy. We won't go back to how we were. So I suppose the one lesson is how to cope with work is the same. It's adaptability. You have to take a mindset of realizing, look, things are changing. Things will never go quite back to how they were. So I've got to be willing to experiment and try, because we're still trying to discover what these new sort of social practices should be. And I see a lot of in Zoom meetings, people importing, especially executives who are used to their top floor corner office, the status symbols and blah. And you don't get that in a virtual world. So they're trying to create their own Zoom studios or just try to recreate some of those symbols. You've got to learn to adapt. And so if there's any word, adaptability would be it. If there's any lesson, it's adaptability. Be willing to experiment.
Excellent. And experimentation, huge thing that I'm a believer on. I always encourage experimentation. To me, Agile is a continuous experiment in learning, and adaptation, absolutely key to that. Okay, so here's one about the festival then. So what was your reason for being involved in the Agile 20 Reflect Festival, and what do you hope that the festival will achieve?
Okay, so I was asked. Reason number one, I was asked. I was delighted to be asked. I mean, I love the idea of celebrating how far we've taken, how far Agile has diffused those ideas. So it was very, very nice for somebody to come along and ask me to be involved. Something close to the heart. What do I hope to get out of it? Well, always a discussion. I'm going to go from a viewpoint that the way forward is actually backwards, because there have been numerous attempts to sort of make the concepts of Agile apply to everything. And I think what we need to learn is the context in which Agile works and where other methods work. Once we do that, then we can apply multiple methods to a project at the same time. And I've seen that done in terms of building things like high-speed rail in a virtual world. This ended up in the Public Accounts Committee ahead of schedule, ahead of budget, because they used multiple methods. Ahead of schedule, ahead of budget, not something you often hear with government projects, especially not HS2, but they did some amazing stuff there. So reason, because I was kindly asked, and I'm just delighted because of the subject. What do I hope to get out of it? Discussion, particularly about the way forward. And I will certainly come from the viewpoint of the way forward is to go back and to remember what the context is.
Interesting. So actually, one of the things that I'll be hosting during the festival is a series of retrospectives on the Agile Manifesto. So to your point there, looking backwards, celebrating where we've come, and then with a little bit of a look to the future. So what can we try next? And it's not intending necessarily to create a new manifesto. It's not necessarily just to say that the old one isn't relevant. It's more to say, let's live as the Agile Manifesto says. Let's do that introspective activity. Let's look backwards. Let's see what we could try and experiment with next.
Of course.
And that's something I'll be hosting throughout. So I'll be looking forward to seeing lots of different people come along and sharing their thoughts, and ultimately creating a community-led reflection, a retrospective on the manifesto itself. And that's something that I think will be useful. All right. So I think our time's drawing a little bit to a close now. So if anyone would like to get involved with any of the talks, the workshops, the celebrations, and otherwise as part of the Agile 20 Reflect Festival, you can do so by visiting the website at www.agile20reflect.org. You can reach out to regional ambassadors if you'd like to host something of your own. There's a schedule already on there of all the things that are already happening that you can get involved with. Simon, any final thoughts you'd like to share with anyone listening today from yourself?
I suppose the one thought, or the one thing which runs through all my work is the importance of context. We're very good at having almost factional wars in terms of this works everywhere, that works everywhere, and the honest truth is most things seem to have a context, except for SWOT diagrams. I don't like SWOT diagrams. But most things.
I've seldom thought about those since my business degree.
But pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, context, absolutely. Great message to leave us on. And absolutely, thank you very much for your time today. And we look forward to seeing your involvement in the festival.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.